Yo, what is up? Welcome to Ninja Geek Games. When it comes to butchering the names of games, Tianxia sits quite high on my list. Now, this is the first board and dice game that I've reviewed, and I was expecting to sit here and discuss an incredibly complex brain burner. Without spoiling too much, I was pleasantly surprised. Designed by Daniel Tassini and Antonio Petrelli, whose other games I also struggle to pronounce, Tianxia is a game set during the Chinese Dynasty at a time where rival states were at war. Well, you've got my attention already. During play, you take on the role of a leader from a noble family, and the idea is to earn prestige from installing governors to buildings that provide income, selling goods to merchants for other precious resources, whilst not forgetting to enlist soldiers at the borders to keep an eye on the aggressive nomads. To do this, you'll be combining worker placement, resource management, track development, and some minor chain linking of actions. However, although there are a number of free actions that you can take, you are limited to just 12 main actions over the course of the game, so I tell you now, it becomes very tight. What I did like was that before the rulebook teaches you how to play, there's a short section on key concepts of the game so you can understand certain aspects of buildings, where resources are used, and how your meeples have different roles depending on where they're placed, which was handy. Now, this copy of the game was provided by Board and Dice, just to make that clear. Let's take a look. The first thing you notice is the size of the board. It's huge and I can't fit all of it in the shop. It's very well illustrated, and yes, it's inundated with icons, but most of them are used regularly, so not a problem if you're used to this format of game. The board is split into 4 main areas. The lower section is the palace, includes 4 tracks. Depending on where you take your main actions on the board, you'll be moving along these tracks and collecting bonus tiles that provide resources and actions to be used later. This is the turn order track, and what's cool here is that each round you reveal a stack of these bonus tiles. When you pass for that round, you get to take one of your choice, limiting the choice of other players who are still taking their turns. Now, in most cases, your track movement is dependent on where you took your action on the board. But sometimes I've found myself looking at another route or action just because I want to progress up a certain track. The reason for this is to grab a tile I really need, either for trade, another action, or these precious jade figurines which become important later. What I like here is that all of these tiles are randomly placed from a huge pool at setup, so this area will look very different each game, but each track also has unique fixed bonuses that you can activate. This track focuses on the military action. Here you can gain more objective cards. This one specialises in resources and goods, and this track provides prestige points. So during play, you and other players take turns taking actions until you pass. This is the barge area that allows you to take an action that costs money. The more you take this action, the more it will cost as you pay extra for each of your meeples on the barges. Yes, these are slightly excessive components that aren't really needed, but I love them. Why wouldn't you? Here you can place your meeple on a barge and gain a resource that can be used later, as well as during the income phase. In that phase you get more resources for having more meeples, so it's a good way to set up your next turn. But as other players start putting their meeples here, some get bumped off and turned into merchants. These will now be placed on your player board, but this also happens at the start of a round where neutral meeples are placed onto the barges to advance the bumping process. Each player has a few areas for merchants that are bumped from barges, and these are associated with actions and abilities that as a free action can be activated if you remove your merchants from the board. These can be pretty basic, like gaining a number of goods and resources, to very powerful ones such as reducing the cost of buildings, reactivating used bonus tiles, and claiming a load of money. What's impressive is that each board is double-sided with different merchant abilities on either side that you can choose at setup. Whilst we're here, these are the components used for other actions like walls and towers that have a stone cost, shipping markers, and action tokens that are essentially your workers. This is the jade figurine storage area, and it becomes very important for endgame scoring and track advancement. When you pass during a round, depending on the number of jade tiles that you've collected, you can spend coin to advance on the palace tracks. The more jade tiles you have, the more costly it becomes, but you then get to progress a number of times on the tracks, and again, if savvy, you could set yourself up for a decent next turn. Here, the board is separated into 7 different regions and is the first area where our worker tokens are placed. Each worker spot is associated with a palace track, so if you place your worker here, you progress on that track as well as taking an action, and in most cases you get a choice of which region per banner. There are lots of things going on here, and for your first game you can get a bit confused. When you place a worker, you may have to pay coin if you have to stack the token, meaning there are other players present, where you then get a couple of actions. Firstly, some action areas have a trade benefit where you can swap certain resources for other goods, although it's pretty costly. Your resources are stone, wood, rice and coin, and your goods are silk, jewellery and helmets? Now each region has a few buildings where you can pay wood to install a governor. If you're the first to do this, you can claim a bonus tile. Black buildings are for income and are a regular source of resources, and some are pretty powerful, rewarding you with prestige points based on certain conditions. The red buildings provide the owners with passive abilities, so for certain actions you'll take, you'll gain goods or resources or get a cost reduction and even prestige points. It can be a rush to claim these, especially to get in first for that free bonus tile. If you delay, it can cost more wood to place a governor if someone was already there, and if you're too late, there'll be no spots left, so you have to find another building. But if favoured buildings are claimed, there are some elements in the game that can remove meeples, so you have another chance. Similar with the bonus tiles on the palace track, the game comes with about 30 different buildings, so every game provides a varied combination of buildings and bonus tiles as well as their location, and it really helps to keep the game engaging with each play. There are a few regions on the coast and their action spot doesn't allow for trade. Instead, you can take a shipping action as well as claiming a building, which is a form of trade that you have a little more control over. You mark the area with a shipping token and these provide endgame prestige points. Each ship has a cost or trade value, which can be certain goods and resources, as well as a port cost, and these tokens are also placed randomly at setup. Once you've paid the trade cost, you then get the rewards, which are generally plentiful, and the ships are marked with your own delivery tokens, limiting ships' trades for other players. As the game continues, these ships will be replaced and swap ports, so we get an ever-changing combo of trade costs and rewards, and again it highlights the variability the game has to offer. At the top of the board is the military area, comprised of places to build walls, towers and soldiers in order to repel the nomads. At the beginning of each round, an attack card is drawn that shows how far chieftains move down the nomad track, as well as how much their strength increases by. This can result in attacks on the land and loss of governors in buildings below, so players almost have to work together to repel these. To do this, you need to build walls and towers that cost stone, and train soldiers that cost rice, and you can choose where to place them. The good thing about these actions is that you can progress at any palace track you want, and for each component place, the defensive marker is increased regardless of which player took the action. At the end of the round, if any nomads attack, you have a multi-step process for each of the 4 tracks, and this breaks up the game a little and can seem a bit fiddly, and I'll go over the steps here. First, each player adds up their own strength in the active area, with those with the highest score load of prestige points. So if there's likely going to be a battle, I found it a good strategy to ensure you have enough stone and rice to be able to fortify and train. Next, the nomad strength is reduced depending on what players have built in the area. This can result in soldiers being removed if the nomads still have enough strength, but it does give prestige. However, if we can't get their strength to 0, either because it was too high to start with or we ignored it, they then go on the rampage. The chieftain moves into our regions and begins to pillage, removing any governors in their path, but it also loses strength. If they make it to the last building, all players lose coin and prestige, so if you're poor, it's gonna hit hard. Next, the player that earned the most prestige from the previous steps earns even more if there are governors remaining, but sometimes you'll forget how much everyone gains, so you'll have to backtrack. Once the nomad resets for this section, you then move to the next area of attack, and as mentioned, this can slow the game down. That's it, that's how the game plays, where the components are great and I love the artwork and theme. Yes, the board is massive, so it can be difficult to access all areas easily, and even at 2 players you're leaning over each other for actions or to look at icons on the other side of the board. Endgame prestige is awarded for track development, jade figurines collected, as well as resources, but the game also has some dual use objective cards. You start the game with 3, and if you meet the endgame requirements, you'll gain a load of prestige. These are for having a number of governors in specific regions, collected bonus tiles, or being the highest on a certain track. But if desperate, you can trade these cards for resources, goods, and even meeple placements, which I thought was great. You do get more for making your way up the red track, so it's a good way to get prestige or those sought after goods that can be limited, and I think these are a great aspect of the game. I've really enjoyed this game so far. It has a huge amount of variability, from the location of palace banners and ship combos to buildings and bonus tiles. You can even opt for a more aggressive version of the Nomad attack cards. However, with the vast quantities of these tiles and tokens, setup isn't quick, but not long enough for me to complain, so we're all good there. I really like the cycling mechanic of the barges, being able to bump merchants onto your player board, whether from player actions or neutral meeples, and the dual use objective cards are a nice touch. I've not played at the 4-player count yet, but can see this being a little punishing if you're not paying attention. I don't really mind this. I like being pushed into thinking of clever ways to get something I need through another route, but you'll have very little time to do this, so think fast. It's not just a pretty little Euro, and it's certainly not overly complex. Yes, the Nomad attacks require you to step back and assess who will benefit the most, but it is a thinker of a game, adapting your turns regularly, which path to take, bearing in mind resource economy is very tight. You must have a plan, and with only 12 or so main actions in the game, there's little time for frittering. However, I wouldn't shy away if you're looking for your first Euro-like game based on the volume of icons and the limited number of actions. Now, I do see this as a heavier set version of the White Castle. There are some similarities. We have a limited number of actions over the course of the game, 3 main action areas on the board, a possible cost of stacking workers, owning the buildings for free income or actions later, and ascending levels within the palace, and overproduced cardboard components just because. Whilst the White Castle, I was always looking for that one more turn, this doesn't exist as much here. I found myself more comfortable with this, and I certainly wasn't staring blankly at the board thinking there must be a way, and that's possibly thanks to the objective cards. The solo variant is ace. Casper and Tianxia have done a wonderful job allowing varying levels of difficulty based on an assortment of ultimate action cards, and if you're looking at this just for solo play, you're all set. It's great. Overall, Tianxia is a tight game that hits a good spot between complexity and brain burning, with a huge level of variability provided. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. This is Ninja Geek Games. Cheers.